Saturn is in Pisces, March 2023 through March of 2025. In this video, I'm giving you 10 things you need to know about this transit, what it means for the collective energies, and we're also going to do a breakdown for each sign of the zodiac. Saturn enters Pisces on March 7th, 2023, and it will stay in Pisces through March 24th of 2025. So that is how long we will be in these energies. So let's talk about Saturn leaving Aquarius. We may have had to consider how we need to be more efficient or effective in the house that Aquarius lands in our chart. We also could have felt like we needed to clean up that area of life, or felt even sort of disconnected from other people when it comes to that area of life, or somehow had that house in our chart somehow connect with other Aquarian topics like rebelliousness or like being online, electricity. There are many other possibilities here. So we're going to get into the 10 things that Saturn in Pisces mean. But before that, let's just talk about what Saturn means and what Pisces means. Saturn is the planet of structure. It rules government. It rules things we depend upon. It is consequences. Now, consequences to me sounds like a bad word, but you can have positive consequences. And Saturn is the planet, the great taskmaster that will hand out rewards or punishment based on what work you have put in. You do not get the benefits of Saturn without doing the work, but the work you do in your life to unlock your Saturn, the work that takes discipline and hard work, no one can take from you the person you become after having learned those lessons. And there is a beauty of Saturn for that reason. Saturn also rules, again, bones, structures, buildings, responsibility, hard work, determination, long-term goals, sacrifice, and integrity. Saturn is represented by the sea goat. And what does the sea goat do? It gets to the top of the mountain. So when we are in the sphere of Saturn and we're working with Saturn, we're going to be dealing with, going through things that are hard for the purpose of reaching some goal, really understanding integrity. Now let's talk about what Pisces means. Pisces is a sign that's very watery. It's a water sign. It's mutable. Mutable means changeable, flexible, and adaptable. So Pisces is ruled by the fish. And what does a fish do? It swims away, right? So Pisces is associated with dreaminess, the subconscious mind, otherworldliness, mysticism. I think of that Hindu saying about how we're all drops of water in the ocean. Pisces is like the whole ocean, and you don't know which drop of water you are, but there is this connection to the collective. So when it comes to Pisces, one of the differences between Pisces and Aquarius, both of these signs deal with the collective. But with Aquarius, it's collective knowledge, whereas with Pisces, it's collective feeling. So we're moving into even more compassion. What makes this transit more interesting is that Neptune, the ruler of Pisces, is also in Pisces. So this even makes that compassion heightened. It makes the faith, the connection to all things, that crown chakra, oneness, Buddhist philosophy, of wanting all beings to be free from suffering. That's Pisces energy. Pisces can also be checking out, right? It can also be avoiding. It can be escapism through any kind of method. Pick your poison, right? So Pisces also rules alcohol. So Pisces being the sign of compassion and faith, it's really about the connection that we have to the collective through our emotional experience. So here are the 10 things we're going to see when Saturn moves into Pisces in March. Number 1, faith meets discipline. Saturn, the planet of discipline, enters the sign of compassion and faith. This is like spiritual sacrifice. This can show up in the world or in our lives where we are more connected to things that we are devoted to, right? That devotion that we have when we have a faith, of people who fast during certain religious practices, right? Or people who have Lent, right? So Lent is a perfect example of this, because the idea is that you go without to show your appreciation to a faith, to God, to, whatever you believe in. But it's kind of about the desire to transcend the ego through some kind of suffering. One of the things that in the West we don't hear about when we hear about religion is the hardship or the sacrifice, that the lessons that you need to go through to become the spiritual master or to become initiated into some kind of spiritual practice. It is not without some giving up something. Other things we could see based on the faith meets discipline aspect of this transit are possibly hardships for areas of life that faith has a big part in. So some kind of challenges to faith, challenges to churches or to religion. This could even be some kind of government interference with religion, or government and like we have in the US, we have the separation of church and state. There may be something that happens that combines them, that somehow certain governments combine with certain religions, or that somehow this is a topic of discussion. Number 2, our faith is restricted in some way. I'm not going to guess the cause here, but this can be things that make us feel like it's harder to believe. It's harder to believe in magic. It's harder to believe in faith. And one of the big things that can cause this are reality checks. It's possible with Saturn and Pisces, we could have some reality checks collectively happening. Saturn and Pisces is fear of not having control over your own life. Fear that no matter what you do, the hand of God is just going to come along and wipe everything away. And so it'll be important during this time to stand firm with what we believe in and keep going. I'm not saying that bad things are going to happen, but we'll have more of that tendency with that Saturn and Pisces to just have this nebulous fear that we don't know where it's coming from, this subconscious fear that doesn't have a tangible root that we can see without at least trying to dig deep within the layers of ourselves. Number 3, idealistic bubbles can burst. One of the issues for people with Pisces placements, myself being one, is that sometimes we don't see things as they are. Sometimes we see things as we want them to be. Sometimes we get so, in love with the fantasy that we can overlook some of the red flags. So this can show up for all of us at this time, where the places in life where we've overlooked the red flags can be more apparent. So again, idealistic bubbles can burst. If you have been in an ideology that is not factual, Saturn being here could put more pressure on the need for our collective ideologies to be factual and make sense. It can stop us from being able to easily, and I think this could be a good thing, go full on delusional. There might be more restrictions against false promises, false gurus, stuff like that. We could also see things that we thought were inspiring in the past turn out to be shams. For some reason, the Wizard of Oz comes to mind at this point, because it's like the moment where they realize it's not real. Right? And then what happens when you realize it's not real? Well, then you find your own magic. Number 4, the desire to escape can increase. What I see collectively for this is probably a rise in virtual reality, more so than it already is. That it's easier to go into a computer screen, to, watch YouTube videos, guilty, to put on a VR headset, to go into the metaverse and become someone else, than it is to face the challenges, the hardship of everyday life. Number 5, people can be more compassionate. So it doesn't come without work though. When Saturn was in Aquarius, people worked harder. Someone out there was working to make all these apps where we could get mobile delivery and stuff. So now what are people working harder on their own compassion? So this can show up again as that spiritual sacrifice, or just an allowance of our hearts to be a little more open. And the way this can show up, I think, with Saturn and Pisces is people will see the need to clean up the pollution, especially things related to all the animals and the environment, because, with Pisces energy, there is that sort of like, sort of like inner witch, inner like forest nymph loves the magicalness of all the animals and all the children and all of the plants and the ecosystem of the whole world and that connectedness, right? So our ability to feel connection to, again, plants, animals, children, vulnerable people who are suffering from silent suffering, this can actually increase. So we might see more people volunteering to help the homeless. We might see more people saying, okay, we need to clean up these problems. We can't just let these problems keep happening anymore. The pollution, anything that has been poisoned in our food supply, people might want to start cleaning that up. People might start wanting to put more effort on that as well, which leads to the next one, number 6, reform on things that cause sickness, reform on things that are poisoning the collective, whatever that might be. This could be pollutants in factories, to poisons in food, to how the oil industry is running, to anything else that we've been tolerating up until this point, especially when it comes to the oceans or drinking water, because Pisces rules water, that we no longer tolerate. I do expect food reform of some kind to be happening during this transit, more regulations on the food industry, possibly closer to March of 2025 when the sextile happens between Saturn and Uranus. But I do think there will be more news about these type of things, foods that poison people, companies that have been getting away with putting things in food that are not food, more awareness around these topics, especially. It's not like we're going to see more people poisoned. We will be more aware of the problem that's already existed, if that makes sense. Number 7, authorities lack responsibility. One of these stereotypical significations of Saturn in Pisces is an authority that is supposed to be in charge, avoiding their responsibility. Pisces is dissolving, right? And I think of Saturn as like a building on the water. Saturn and Pisces I think of as the building on the water, where the building has these posts that go into the earth and they need to be solid, but the water is just like rotting away the wood and eventually it dissolves. Now, of course, we have buildings that can withstand that, but even if you've ever lived near the water, you have to keep up your home so much more because the water just erodes it. It rusts it. It needs so much more maintenance. So I think of this, the wateriness of Pisces dissolving the ability for certain authority figures to take responsibility. That could be through sickness. That could be through mental illness. That could be through they just don't step up and don't, for some other reason, end up taking the lead in ways they are supposed to. And often this will be because they ended up in a situation where they're in a victim role and they can't. And so it's like the people you are depending upon who are supposed to be keeping the order, keeping the peace, upholding the law or whatever. Now suddenly they're sick. Now suddenly they're hurt and they need us to help them instead of the other way around. Number 8, surrender for our dreams. One of the most potentially beautiful aspects of Saturn in Pisces is that spiritual surrender, surrender of control. But the beautiful way this can show up is sacrificing something that we are devoted to for something we're devoted to, sacrificing something for our dreams. And it's possible for some of us, especially if you have a really clear vision of your life, that when Saturn hits Pisces, that you may find that if you have been avoiding giving up something, it's like you want this life, this future, but you want to work out, but you haven't started, or, you want to be a bodybuilder, but you haven't changed your diet. At this point, it's like you can no longer avoid the sacrifices you need to make to have the dream life you want to have. Now, this will apply more to people, I think, who have a clear vision for their life. I think if you don't have a clear vision for your life at this time, it's likely to feel a little bit different and possibly even hit a little bit harder because you don't have a dream to sacrifice for. And you may feel the longing for that, the longing for a big dream or something to be inspired by. Number 9, minimalism can become more popular. That is because Pisces does deal with the whole, the collective emotions. And minimalism is one of the things we could see in that. We could see, because Saturn restricts whatever it touches. And with, Uranus and Taurus putting changes on physical things, we may just see this rise of this spiritual philosophy that is more about connection to other people and less about money, less about things, less about richness, and more about richness of spirit, whatever people deem that to be. And one of the philosophies that really stands out here is minimalism. The other that really stands out to me that could become more popular at this time is Stoicism, which I'm a huge fan of. And the reason I think minimalism has the potential to become popular is because when we're connected to someone else, we don't want to have more than they do. We want to make sure everyone else is okay first. So we could even see some people putting structure to charities or nonprofit organizations that are designed to help people who are suffering. And number 10, I predict the rise of art, music, and film. This can include videos. It can include literature, any kind of body of work, creative body of work that people put out into the world. I would not be surprised at this time if there is another Avatar type movie or something else that really inspires people, more sci-fi movies. Not saying that we haven't had art or literature, but it's more likely to see those kind of things that are infused with magic. And the reason is because Saturn is what we work for. So there's potential that there are more people in the world at this time working to make art possible, working to make music possible, working to make films or other pieces of art or works of art that allow us to escape and have that element of fantasy and have that element of magicalness. There can be a lot of magical things created at this time. And that, some of that can be VR, but it can still be movies. It can still be new sorts of apps or new sorts of technologies that bring in fantasy into the mix. Anything that takes us to another world is possible here. So this could even be things that aren't movies. Like I think of, what are those like science things where you go, you look at the stars, there's a name for that. Or like, I think of like museums where they have exhibits that are like super magical, right? So there could be some kind of new sort of theme park or something, released at this time that has some kind of artistic or magical or, just not just Disneyland type stuff, like rides and stuff, but something that's more related to film or art or video or just the whole package of all of the senses that puts it together into some kind of really beautiful experience. I do think there could be many different possible areas where this shows up. We could see, certain authors, publish more books that are related to fantasy at this time. We could see movies come out, again. So any of these topics, because, Pisces, is that magic in life. It's that escapism, anything that is like magical and fun. And again, transports our senses into another world. And usually it's also inspiring, right? So I'm not talking about like the creepy ass alien movies. I'm talking about the works of art that inspire you and move you. I expect that there could be some of these happening because again, Saturn rules putting in the work and Pisces rules fantasy and inspiration. So we literally can see people put in the work toward works of art or inspirational things, inspirational speeches, inspirational anything. Okay, so now that we have covered the collective energy, we're going to move on to what it means for you personally based on your rising sign, this Saturn transit. So I recommend starting with your rising sign and then go on to your sun or even your moon if you want to go that deep. But definitely do not skip your rising sign because that's going to be the most relevant to what's happening in your external world. Just a reminder, I am a Placidus reader, but whenever we do these collective horoscopes, we always have to go with whole sign because that's the only way to do it in a group of people like this. So moving on now to the first sign, which is Aries. For Aries, you guys have Saturn transiting your 12th house at this time. At this time, there's more of a focus on what's already been done in your life than what is new or beginning. This is like the phase in life after after the fruit's been picked off the tree. And you're like, okay, now your focus is generally going to be on the things that have happened, the goals you've reached in the last 5 or so years. And it's less likely to be a time of easily starting new things. It's more of a time of coming to terms with how things have gone, and introspection and reflecting and realizing. And there can be temptations at this time to feel like I should have done this, because the planet of your goals is in the house of kind of loss. So it really is kind of a time where you're winding down from your big goals that have happened. Certain aspects of life at this time can fall away. It's okay to let them. It's okay to let what falls away fall away, and know that you're not in a new beginning cycle with your Saturn at this time. You are in a ending, finishing up, like tying all the loose ends up in your mind about whatever you've just experienced. Oftentimes during this cycle, during this 2-year transit, you're going to feel this need for clarity or this pressure to go do something or to go move forward, but you may lack the ability to actually know what to do. So again, this is the time to let what's falling away fall away, and to know that it's not usually a time where you get clarity on your next steps, although you may feel some of that internal pressure to do just that. You can work with this transit by becoming ready for the next stage, like really doing your best. It's like a pruning stage, right? The tree has already produce fruit, and then all the fruit came off. You got all the fruit. Now it's barren. And then what do? You prune it, and you adjust, and you consider what could have been done better. But with this transit, it's super easy to go into a guilty phase, because Saturn going through your 12th, sometimes you can feel guilty at this time. Sometimes you will, need to work harder at this time to deal with things that you've been avoiding. This is a time to also really allow yourself to see the things that you haven't necessarily dealt with, perhaps because you've been in a cycle of life where it's been possibly busier, but either way, it's Saturn transiting that 12th house. You have to work harder to connect to your own subconscious mind or understand your own deeper reasons for doing things. This is a transit where it's actually useful to do that. It's useful to allow yourself to ponder, allow yourself to silently meditate, allow yourself stillness. This is a time of stillness. Now, this does not mean you can't work during this transit. You can't get anything done. And some of this cycle will also depend on where your progress moon is personally. So this is a general reading. So take what resonates, leave the rest. Work with this transit by becoming ready for this new beginning that's going to happen in a couple of years. It's a time of clearing away what isn't working. It's not a time of trying to manipulate the outer world to go do something. You may not be able to. For Taurus, Saturn and Pisces will be in your 11th house. So what happens when Saturn goes through your 11th house is life demands you to deal with group dynamics, to join groups, to integrate into group life. So you may find yourself being more social. You may find the groups that you do belong to, whether they be friends or associations, demanding more from you at this time. It's a good time to answer to those demands, to step up to that responsibility. That is how you work with the Saturn transit, is you step up to the responsibilities that life hands you in the house that Saturn lands. So that's responsibilities to live up to your hopes and dreams, and responsibilities to the people around you, especially the groups of people around you. There is a sense of this being a time of culmination of the seeds you planted roughly 16 and a half years ago. This should have started for you when Saturn was in Aquarius. Not every culmination is good. Not every culmination is bad. It depends on a lot of things. But you're still in this sort of time of like reaping whatever you've sown. So the advice is enjoy it, because this is sort of, once this transit ends, once Saturn's out of Pisces and it enters Aries for you, that'll be your 12th house. And that's when you look back on all of this time and see what worked and what didn't. So now is not the time to contemplate. Now is the time to stay active, stay involved in the groups that you belong to, handle the challenges that come, because that's when Saturn will reward you the most. Now, there are some things that sometimes you have to face during this transit that can be challenging, because usually by this point, in the Saturn cycle. Either you have reached your hopes and dreams, or you get the clarity and realize that what you did want or what you hoped was going to happen doesn't happen. So the best example I have for this is like when a president loses an election, it sucks. They see that dream isn't going to happen, but you still got to put yourself out there. You still got to try. And so that can be part of this transit, just depending on a lot of different factors in your own personal chart. But either way, Saturn going through the 11th is going to be a time of work, work in groups, working harder in groups, having to overcome the challenges that group life brings you, having to step up to new responsibilities that either require leadership. Leadership's also a really, really strong theme when Saturn is in that 11th house. Moving on now to Gemini. For Gemini, Saturn's entering your 10th house, and this is a very significant transit, so I have a lot to say here. When Saturn enters your 10th house, this is where you rise and you see the culmination of the seeds you planted about 14 years ago. So whether this transit goes well or is more challenging really kind of depends on what you've been doing and what age you are, what cycle of life you're in. So the way to work with this transit is to enjoy it while it's here, because whatever you are having to step up to in career, in your public life, this transit only happens every 28 years. So again, enjoy it while it's here, because at some point what goes up must come down. This is not a guaranteed success transit, but it's usually as successful as you are prepared to handle the success. So the problems that can come up here is if you're not ready for what you've been asking for, if you're not ready for your goals at this point, it can be a disaster because you're like, you feel like you can't handle it. You will probably be given or experience more responsibility in your professional or public life, having to step up to more responsibilities, to do more, be more, handle more. If you are interested in leadership, this is a great time because you might get a leadership position. Even if you don't want to be a leader, someone might want you to, you might have to. Things like that can happen during this transit. This is like the time in life, the 2 years that you get to make your mark on the world. So, and there's usually a lot to do. There is a sense of integration when this transit happens where you are kind of at your most complete. It's almost like a personal full moon, not quite, but it almost is in the sense that you are at your most complete, you are at your most whole, you're most integrated, at least in this phase of the cycle of life you're in. You've gone through the full cycle of figuring out who you are when Saturn was down in that first quadrant, and then figuring out how you relate to other people, more self-introspection, figuring out what you're good at, how to express yourself, and then starting to see those seeds bear fruit. And now it's like the tree of your life is the ripest. The fruit on the tree of your life is the ripest. So it's the time where you get to kind of harvest that. Now, if you planted crappy seeds, you're going to have crappy fruit. If a bunch of bad stuff happened, the fruit might not be the best on this one. And if that's true, you get another 28-year cycle to do it again. One thing to watch out for during this transit is ignoring your personal life. This is something that people can struggle with during this time because it is so outwardly focused. It is one of the more work-centered transits, but also can again feel the most rewarding. But, it's important to make sure you're not totally setting aside the people that helped you get to where you are. So that is what I have for Gemini, and moving on now to Cancer. For Cancer, Saturn is transiting your 9th house of the law, belief systems, the meaning of life. This is like the 2-year prep for your time when the fruit on the tree of your life is the ripest when Saturn's in that 10th house, when it comes to your long-term goals. So when Saturn's in the 9th, it's like all the last minute little information or courses you might need or education you might need to go to that next stage of, the ultimate, right? And the ultimate kind of depends on what you've done up until now and what age you are and stuff like that. But you're applying what you already have learned about yourself and with other people to the bigger framework of the outside world. You want to watch out during this transit that you don't get too stuck in rigid belief systems of like, I'm right and you're wrong. And if you get too caught up in that, like stuck in your own way, ways of thinking about things, sometimes legal troubles can happen as a result. Some of the potential challenges of this transit are obstacles or slowing down of topics that relate to the ninth house, like the law or like learning, higher education, travel. It's not like you won't be able to travel, but that if you do, maybe it'll take more work. Areas of ninth house take more work. Now, a positive manifestation, you could be writing a book at this time if that applies to you. Saturn in the ninth is the time where you could publish a book or write a book because it's like you're putting more discipline and work into that area of life. If you're an author and you always publish books, maybe not. Maybe this is a time where it slows down, or the book you're writing has more problems that have to be addressed, or the publishing company, stuff like that. It's more likely to have, if you do take a long journey or a long trip during this transit, it's more likely that this is because you want to, like, it's going to benefit your career in some way. This isn't usually the time in life where you do a eat, pray, love journey and you just go become a Buddhist monk or train with monks or, go to temples and stuff. Usually it's more of a focused and disciplined time. You could also be drawn to ninth house topics. So again, that's the law, philosophy, the meaning of life, any kind of spiritual or religious doctrines or information. But usually when Saturn is transiting your ninth house, you want it to be useful and practical. This isn't, again, like just a mystical journey as much as something that you maybe want to use either for your career or in life. Learning is likely in some form during this transit, and it's ideal to look at it as almost like a job, like a responsibility, an area of life where if you put more work into this area at this time, you will get the rewards of Saturn. That's the reward of Saturn, is after the hard work is done. So moving on now to the next sign, which is Leo. For Leo, Saturn is transiting your 8th house. So this is the 8th house of intimacy, other people's money, joint finances. One of the standard definitions here is a need for self-sufficiency, because Saturn does tend to restrict things. So if you're a Leo who's trying to get a loan, this is not a time to get a loan. This is a time where if you have been relying on other people's resources in some way, they could be denied to you. Or if you were hoping that someone would help you out or you were hoping to do a startup and you needed funds for it, oftentimes that's not able to happen. Oftentimes the sort of lesson Saturn is teaching, whether it's fun or not, I know it's not always fun, is to be independent. So you often during this transit have to do things more independently than you have been in the past. So this transit and even the last transit has been about really applying discipline in relationships. So the last transit has been the one-on-one relationships. Now it's the deeper relationships, the deep connection, the trust. You may have to put more energy into the relationships with the people you trust the most, or you might have to deal with any challenges to trust in your relationship. So any trust issues that you have not dealt with at this time, Saturn coming through this house will bring those up to be dealt with. So areas that could come up, your own transformation, your own getting out of your own comfort zone, risk. This isn't really a time to be risky. Things like intimacy, sexuality. If there have been challenges, this will be a time to deal with those challenges, of the challenge of what's stopping you from connecting to your partner, those kind of things. Facing fears in any 8th house area. So that could be sharing, fear of intimacy, fear of change. At this time, the biggest thing here that we can see is you might have to face the fact that you can't do everything by yourself and come to terms with how and where and just exactly in what ways you need other people. So that's what I have for Saturn transiting the 8th house. Now moving on to the next sign, which is Virgo. For Virgo, Saturn is entering your 7th house of relationships. So if you are already in a relationship, challenges to that relationship will put more demands upon you. Now, this can also be just the significant people in your life, close friends, can be more demanding at this time. And some people end up cutting off friends or cutting off relationships because of this, because the relationship will become so demanding that you realize it is not worth it. Not everyone has it go like that. For some people, they will respond to the demands in their relationships. It's a time to basically, wherever Saturn is, you get more rewards if you handle the problems. And it could be that there were some underlying issues with relationships that now that Saturn is transiting that 7th house, you can see them and work on them. It is the time to work on relationships because these are the partnerships that you're going to need when Saturn gets up to your 10th house and you are at that apex point, that culmination of whatever you've been working toward. So it's a good to work with where your Saturn is. This is also a significant time because Saturn moves above the horizon in your chart. And this is a really, really big energetic shift from you preparing to be the person you want to be, to starting to see the beginnings of the fruits of your efforts. So whatever you've been working on, especially in the last 7 years, whatever seed you were planting 7 years ago, this is the time, if you have worked hard, if you have honed your skills, that you may start to see some of the fruits of that labor. It is not the culmination, it's the beginning. It's like when the tree starts growing fruit, but maybe it's just like a little teeny apple and it's not a full apple yet, right? So you can start to see the fruits of your efforts. So that's kind of a positive shift where that energy of discipline and hard work starts to be seen in the world again after, technically Saturn's been below the horizon for a good 14 years of your life now. So it's kind of a big transit for you guys in that regard. And also, it will be a time to focus on relationships. Whether you're single or coupled, it's a time to focus on relationships. It's a time where challenges can happen, but also, again, the way to deal with Saturn is embrace the challenges, overcome them, whichever way is right for you. This is a general reading, but just know that if you put in the effort during this transit, the idea is to strengthen the relationships that are in alignment and weed out the relationships that are not. So that is what I have for Virgos, and moving on now to the next sign, which is Libra. For Libra, Saturn is transiting your 6th house of work and health. So the stereotypical signification here is if you have health issues, they can come up. But what's happening is usually at this time, if there was an already existing problem to your routine or your diet or even your work, Saturn reveals that. Okay, so it reveals the already existing thing and can tend to make it worse until you deal with it. You can't avoid it anymore. If you have been avoiding something, if you have been eating like crap, you're going to feel it. If you have been working a job you hate, you're going to feel it. Sometimes people during that Saturn through the 6th house transits will have challenges to their work. Sometimes they will have a job loss. That's not always. That kind of depends on your personal placements. But what we can be certain of for Libras at this time is that Saturn asks you what you're willing to work for. And it's a time of putting in work. You don't necessarily get the results during this transit. It's a time of sort of becoming the most efficient version of yourself so that when Saturn does hit that horizon and it leaves Pisces, that's when you're going to start to be able to see the fruits of your efforts. So now is the time to do the effort. Now is the time to put in the work. Now that can be for whatever goal you want to have. If your goal is more fitness related, you may be putting in effort in your physical health. If your goal is work related, you may be becoming more skilled at what you do, becoming more efficient at what you do, getting better at it, putting in the time and the energy to be a stronger, more solid version of yourself in your job, in your career, in your work, when Saturn gets to that above the horizon point. Now, another way this can show up though, another way to work with this, I should say, is, no, I shouldn't say that. Another thing to know about this is that sometimes when Saturn's in your 6th house, it's just more chores, man. Sometimes you just got to do more chores and you just got to take care of more stuff that is thankless. It's not even the work that's going to get you anywhere. Sometimes it's the thankless things that you have to do more to achieve the same result because there's some kind of obstacle to your daily routine. There's more work to be done. The same thing you did before this transit now just becomes harder. And some of that hard work isn't necessarily going to translate into being better at at what you do. It might just translate into, oh, now I have to spend 2 hours working on this before I can start this project. Whereas before I used to go straight to it. Either way, it is a time of work, and that is what Saturn does. But if you are working on a long-term goal, that the time and energy you put into that is not really going to come to full completion until Saturn transits your 10th house. So it's a time to hone in on skills and become more efficient, regardless of whatever else is happening, to reach those goals you want to reach. So that's what I have for Libras. Moving on now to the next sign, which is Scorpio. For Scorpio, Saturn's entering your 5th house, which can have you putting more work into your self-expression, how you relate to other people, especially how you express yourself to other people. So there is a tendency when Saturn hits this house to maybe be more introverted or avoid dealing with it, but it's not recommended because you're going to miss those lessons. You're going to miss the person you become when you figure out how to be yourself again, because you just had Saturn go through your 4th house in the last, 10 years. So it's been all about self-examination, introspection, figuring out who you are again, who this version of you is, how this version of you, what your values are, or how you think. So now it's time to really figure out who you are with other people, how you express yourself to other people. You could also work on your creativity at this time. If you have kids, you might have to put more work into taking care of them in some way, whether they're young or old. You could have older children and just be putting more energy into grandchildren or, other things like that. But basically if you want to use Saturn the most during this transit, if you have a creative self-expression you want to work on, now is the time to put in some work and really, treat it like a job, kind of, treat it like you're putting in your 1,000 hours, try to get better at it. It's not just about enjoying the fun, right? Because Saturn's in your fun house. So it's not as fun. The fun becomes work when Saturn's in the fun house, if that makes sense. When Saturn is in this house, gambling or high risk activities don't usually go well. It's also a time where, for those who are self-employed, it tends to slow down. It doesn't mean that you can't do it, but it's not usually a get rich quick transit in any sense of the word. So that's what I have for Scorpios. Moving on now to Sagittarius. For Sagittarius, Saturn is transiting your 4th house of home and your emotional security, your emotional foundation. This is a very important transit because Saturn will hit the IC. That's the bottom of your chart. And this is when you may feel like you are at your most obscure. Okay. You may feel like you are not out in the world at this time. Your goals are not coming to fruition. And it's because you're in the phase of planting the seed. Okay. When Saturn hits the top of your chart, that 14 years from now, that's when you're going to be in the time of picking the fruit and the harvest. So at this time, Sagittarius, it's a good time to ask yourself, what seeds am I planting for the future? This does not mean that because Saturn's at the bottom of your chart, nothing good is happening, but it can feel like a quiet time of new beginnings, of starting rather than of maintaining something that's already been developed. So it's a good time to figure out, what seeds am I planting? Who do I want to be in 14 years? And I know that might seem like a long time. And the thing is, you don't have to know which seed you are going to plant. You don't have to know exactly the tree and be like, oh, this is the tree I want to grow in 14 years. You just have to be moving in that direction and continue, as Saturn continues to transit, reorienting yourself toward that direction. So it's all about what you're starting right now, what new beginnings, and the thing to work on the most at this time is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. It is a really, really good transit for self-development, for figuring out what you need to feel okay, what kind of structures or routines you need in your life to feel good about yourself, and to put in some work to achieve that end. There are times when Saturn's in your 4th house where you can either take on a parental role or you attract a mentor or a teacher, someone in your life who becomes sort of like a mother or father figure. That is something that sometimes does happen during this transit. So the best way to work with this one is really address anything that is keeping you from feeling grounded, safe, or connected in your own body and your own skin, because that's the foundation you're going to need for all the outer work that you'll be doing in the future years as Saturn moves up your chart. So that's what I have for Sagittarius. Now moving on to Capricorn. For Capricorn, Saturn is going through your third house, and your third house is all about your mind. So it's about restructuring your mind, and some of that may come from things that you realize. You realize ways you need to think differently. You realize ways that the way that you approach your mindset is not working. So this is the stereotypical transit where I would say doing mindset work really makes a lot of sense because you're applying discipline to that area. Now, for some other Capricorns, this could show up as working on a vehicle or putting work into a car, putting more work into transportation in some way, or putting more work into dealing with relatives. This could be siblings, or it could be even aunts and uncles or cousins. So you could literally be putting more work into those relationships, having more effort required in those areas of life as well. So this is all about being willing to change how you speak, think, listen, or mostly your attitude. So you may have some situations with people when communicating, especially if communication issues come up at this time. You may be more inspired to work on them, or some things may happen that sort of cause you to need to work on them, whether you really want to or not. Sometimes it's self-initiated change. Sometimes the change kind of happens to you a little bit with Saturn. But either way, it's a time of really focusing on improving or making your communication more effective, especially the way that you talk to yourself, your self-talk, your attitude, and really seeing ways that maybe your attitude up until now has limited you in certain ways, and how you are willing to change those things and putting energy and effort into being willing to change those things. So moving on now to the next sign, which is Aquarius. For Aquarius, this transit is happening in your second house. So Saturn transiting your second house will be a time of needing to focus on your values, your money, your possessions. Now, for some Aquarius, this will show up as you perhaps needing to work harder to make money, or needing to focus more. But usually Saturn through the second isn't the kind of transit where you're like, oh, I'm just going to work hard, I'm going to make a bunch of money. Usually it's more like working on your values, working on more of the inner life. It's about figuring out what matters to you. Okay, so that's kind of what Saturn is going to help you accomplish, support you in accomplishing, possibly by putting up some obstacles that force you to look at this stuff. It's not really a time where it's like, oh, I'm going to go get rich now, or oh, I'm going to go make easy money. In fact, if you try to push it and try to focus only on material success, you may not be as successful in that. It doesn't mean you can't make money during this transit, but that if you it's not a get rich quick transit. It's not a time where you're going to have easy money come in necessarily. You could probably do the same things to make money. Some Aquarius could have a job loss, but that's not usually what happens when Saturn goes through the second. Sometimes you have to work harder to make the same amount of money, but usually it's more the focus is brought inward. What's important to you? What matters to you? What are your values? Occasionally, when Saturn is in the second house, people will feel like they're losing control of their possessions or their finances. This sometimes does happen with Saturn through the second. And the thing about Saturn in the second, it's not there for you to build skills or make money. That comes later down the road in Saturn transits. Right now, it's you had Saturn go through your 12th house. Then it went through your first house of kind of this new beginning of figuring out who you are again. So you're in this cycle of self-analysis really for quite a few years. And the best way to work with this transit is organize your money in such a way that you don't have to think about it, that it's not always on your mind, because if it is, it's it's not like just thinking about money all the time is going to make this transit better. Saturn isn't bringing money. Saturn is bringing discipline to finances. So that's the best thing you could do here is you might see the challenges with money that you have, and it might be a time to work on that money mindset, or work on how you approach money, or automate your finances, or make slow, deliberate changes to your money. But I wouldn't even say money is the focus, even though Saturn tends to bring a focus to that area. Again, the area of focus really is what do I value? And some of that can come from challenges, and some of the challenges might happen with other people because the second house is opposite the eighth house of intimacy. So this can be more about a need to be independent in ways where to connect with someone would require you to sacrifice your values, and you have to see what matters most to you. Those kind of things can be coming up like that, like value decisions and value judgments that have to be made. So that's what I have for Saturn transiting for Aquarius. So now we're going to move on to Pisces. For Pisces, Saturn is transiting your first house of you, your identity, major life decisions. When Saturn goes through your first house, this is not a time of fast changes. Sometimes you want fast changes. Sometimes you want deeply to make changes to who you are, to your personality, to your identity. But Saturn going through here kind of stops that from being a fast process and almost forces it to be a slow process. Saturn also going through your first house is the beginning of a cycle of internal realizations. So a lot of energy is put here when Saturn's in this house on who am I versus who do I want to be? What responsibilities do I want to step up to? And there is a newness and a freshness and a quietness in this part of the cycle, but there's also a new beginning here and a new energy that can show up because it's the starting of this cycle of Saturn going through the bottom of your chart. It's all about internal growth and self-discovery. So this really, you could see this as restructuring your identity, restructuring your inner life, restructuring your emotional world, your emotional foundation, getting to know yourself and that kind of thing. Sometimes you can have more responsibility at this time. Sometimes you will have to handle more than you have in the past just because Saturn hitting that angle, going through that first house, it's almost like you identify during this transit as someone who is responsible, and that can happen through responsibility being put on your shoulders. But the life changes you want to make at this time, you probably have big ones you want to make, and they're probably not quick, easy little details to, this is not a transit where you're going to be doing the fine tuning. This is a transit where it's like you're this big ass tanker ship and you want to make a turn. And it's like, that's going to be a big turn. You're not even turning yet, right? When Saturn's in this house, you're not even turning yet. You're just thinking about making the turn. And this is like a process of that slow change to become the person you want to be at this next phase of your Saturn cycle. So it's not even necessarily required right now to know what your goals, your huge long-term goals are. It's not required to figure it all out. Saturn will have you doing a lot of internal work and that restructuring, it's going to help you, when Saturn moves into Aries, that'll be your second house. When that transit happens, then it'll be figuring out what your values are. So first you got to know who you are. And then you can figure out what your values are, what matters most to you. This does not mean you cannot have goals. You cannot be doing things with your life. You cannot be active in your community or, having a life where you're focusing on outward success, but just that it may not be the best timing to start something brand new that hasn't already got some momentum. And, there just may be more energy pulling you back to figuring out who you are again. Again, restructuring that identity of who you are. So that's what I have for Pisces. If you like this video, I will be doing another video on Pluto and Aquarius at some point in the future that helps us understand that transit and how to deal with those energies coming up, as that is another major player that's going to affect this. And this is why, even though Saturn moves from Aquarius to Pisces, the fact that Pluto is going to move into Aquarius right around the same time really does change that quite a bit. It changes the flavor in addition to Neptune being in Pisces. This is a time where, we could be focusing more on our compassion in all these different areas of life. And again, spiritual discipline, spiritual surrender, what we are devoted to. So as Saturn moves into Pisces, this will have us all focusing more on collective compassion. We need to watch out for escapism. We might see some things related to Pisces like faith or inspirational teachers or coaches being called called out for things they've avoided, responsibilities they've avoided up until this point. We can also see people wanting to clean up our waters and wanting to clean up pollution, and people calling for more legislation or requirements around that. And on a personal level, the way to work with Saturn in Pisces is to ask ourselves, what are we devoted to? That spiritual sacrifice. What do we think is so inspiring and so beautiful in the world that the world needs more of, that we are willing to give up something, to sacrifice something for the good of the whole? And we don't want to take this into martyr complex area of like sacrificing everything, right? Because we need to kind of put on our oxygen mask first. So you need to kind of consider what kind of person you are. If you're the kind of person that will always give up more, then you need to watch out in this transit for doing that too much. If you're the kind of person that's like, nope, I'm taking care of me, then this will be a transit that might ask you or encourage you or make you just feel like giving of yourself in ways that you haven't before, being of service to your community or the collective, especially the more sensitive souls of the world, or the more precious animals and plants and the ones that need the protecting the most, right? So those are things that collectively we can see during this transit. And if you want more on upcoming transits, make sure you subscribe. I will be doing a Pluto and Aquarius video at some point in the near future. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.